Mr. Stu Spencer, thank you so much for spending some time with us here at the Reagan Foundation. It's really an honor to sit with you.
Well, honored to be here.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. What did you see in Ronald Reagan that made you think, I want to run his campaign for governor?
We didn't know anything about him. We didn't see anything. We were invited to lunch with him and his brother and sort of offered his job. Well, the ironical part was 2 weeks before George Christopher called us and was to be a primary opponent of Reagan's and offered us the job, period. And so we were somewhat of a dilemma.
Well, it's a good dilemma to have, right?
Yeah,
you can have this campaign or that campaign.
That's right. Otherwise, we were going to have job. We were going to work.
Right.
So we went and met with Reagan and his brother. We found him interesting. We found him articulate.
Mm-hmm.
Reagan's attachment to politics had been with Goldwater, and we'd seen some of that. He gave a couple of great speeches.
The Time for Choosing speech,
Right, Time
to be
for
sure.
Choosing was one of them. He was addicted to Human Events, which is a magazine.
Yeah, it was a very important magazine, right, in his reading list.
It was a conservative Bible back in that day. People would say early on in his campaign, you know, what was he doing prior? I said he was reading Human Events.
If you had to narrow it down to one thing, what is the biggest lesson that you learned from Ronald Reagan, given all the years that you worked with him?
He was steady in his belief system. He had a lot of tough decisions to make, a lot of tough political decisions, mm-hmm, to make, and a lot of them would be one element within the party or within an administration wanted to do this or that. He always stuck to his principles.
And is it fair to say that his principles were the lens through which he considered all of his decisions, and that was how he approached everything, is through the prism of those principles?
He was considered conservative, right? But he was the most pragmatic guy I've ever met.
So simultaneously principled and pragmatic.
And pragmatic, that's right.
Is it fair to say that that combination of principle and pragmatism is what led to so many of his legislative accomplishments? Because he had a Democratic Congress throughout his presidency.
Definitely, and he also had a Democratic state legislature.
Right.
And yes. For example, when you look at his track record as governor on environment, he would be an environmentalist. That's not consistent with what most conservatives are.
Was the term and the prism through which he saw that as conservation? Is that a fair?
Yeah, it was conservation.
Right.
And one of the reasons is his director of natural resources was Ike Livermore, mm-hmm, who was a member of the Sierra Club. Mm-hmm. He was a guiding light.
Mm-hmm. Well, what was Ronald Reagan like under pressure, or when things were not going well, say in the 1980 campaign or the 1984 campaign, or both of them? What was the man like when things weren't going well? And obviously any campaign has its ups and downs.
The worse things got, the happier he was. He had a great sense of humor. I tested him one time. Ronald Reagan gave his speeches off cards.
Right.
Everything with a card. I wondered for months, if his cards got screwed up, how would he do? So we had a special election in California in Contra Costa County. Reagan was governor. It was important that we win this Senate seat for, mm-hmm, him to govern. So I did a fundraiser. I went to Sacramento, drove down with him to Contra Costa. And in the car, he had his cards, back seat, and he was which was normal for him, and reviewing his cards, and then he puts them down next to him, and he goes, sleep. I kept looking at the cards, and I said, I wonder how good this guy really is. Finally, I picked the cards up and shuffled them, put the cards back down. We go to the event, I go to the back of the room, I watch him, and he starts his speech, and you can tell he isn't confused, but it's like, holy Toledo, what happened? But he worked his way through it, so forth, so on. He was good. And then he was going back to Sacramento, and his driver found me and said, the governor wants to talk to you. I said, I don't want to see the governor. He says, Stu, he's pissed off. You better go see him. So I went and saw him. And he said, don't you ever do that to me again. The window was rolled down. Don't you ever do that to me again. Up in my face.
That's a rather unconventional thing for an advisor to have done, to mix up the principal's cards. But
I was not a conventional guy.
Mm-hmm.
My curiosity was killing me. The guy was so good with his cards. I thought to myself, what happens?
Sounds like it went
Fine.
well. And was the special election won?
Yes, we won special. Everything went fine. Uh-huh. And he forgot about it, mm-hmm. and I never did it again.
Wow. Well, that certainly sounds like a memorable moment. I'm curious, is there another significant memorable moment about your time with Ronald Reagan, whether when he was governor or president or anywhere in between?
There was a time in the governor's race, the telling issue in that campaign was Berkeley was aflame with left-wingers. He gave a speech. We were in the Central Valley. At that point in time in the campaign, campus unrest was not showing up in the polling data as a big issue. And I think we were in Stockton, and it was some Republican group. And he got into his speech, and he was crazy. I mean, he was attacking the governor, attacking Clark Kerr, the president of the University of California. I mean, he was swinging hard. And in our sense, political sense, it wasn't that big an issue yet. Mm-hmm. So we got back to the room that night, which we always do, and we talk about it, what happened. And I said, what the hell were you doing? You know? I said, our polling data, it doesn't show up. It wasn't showing up yet. And he looks at me, he says, Spencer, stick with me because it's going to be there sooner or later. Otherwise, he said to me, I'm going to bang it and bang it hard, and you better live with it. When you look back at it historically, the turning issue of that campaign was campus unrest. Now, the fact that Pat Brown couldn't do a lot about it, but when it happens on your watch,
right,
you got to pay the price.
Do you see that Ronald Reagan impacted the arc of how we understand individual liberty or economic opportunity or freedom and democracy, peace through strength or national pride?
I think yes is the best answer to that, particularly the one of capitalism versus socialism. I mean, there's a very distinctive difference there. And it's you can demonstrate his position on capitalism and versus socialism. In that aspect, he was a great believer in Friedman, the economist. But a lot of those concepts today are attributed to Reagan, I noticed, not Friedman. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was a junior Friedman, is what he was.
He was well-read on Milton Friedman.
Well-read. He read everything.
Can you elaborate briefly on the nature of how he read and how immersed he was in these thinkers of over the years?
The question, for example, why did he read that book or not read that book, it would be because he talked to somebody that told him, "Yeah, Ron, you should read this book." Most of us say, "Yeah," and go back and forget it. He'd go back and read it, and no matter who told him that.
And then he would internalize this and make up his own mind as to whether or not he believed in it or not.
That's right. That's right. Because I seen him read articles, stuff that I'd read, and so forth, and he'd come back next day and tell me, "That's a bunch of trash."
So he made up his own mind.
He made up his own.
So,
He'd read it, but then it didn't fit.
would you please share with our audience anything you would recommend that people read or look into if they want to learn more about Ronald Reagan? Or more generally, what should people know today about Ronald Reagan, the Ronald Reagan you knew?
Well, number one, there's plenty of books out there. And I think this year there's 3 books. One a biography, and I can't remember the name of the guy there. I did the promo for him, but I can't remember his name. Shirley.
Craig Shirley.
Well, that's one of them.
So Craig Shirley's book.
Yeah, and Craig. And then there's another one out there by an author, established author. And then Kachigin, who was a speechwriter.
Yeah, Ken Kachigin is coming out, or has a new book out. Right?
On his last campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So those will all should be read if you want to know more about the best biographer was Lou Cannon.
Mm-hmm.
He understood the guy. He lived with him. He was there at the beginning.
And
he saw him when he was a flailing candidate and when a polished candidate too.
well, any closing thought on Ronald Reagan? Anything you want to leave us with?
When he was out of office, we knew he had Alzheimer's. We were playing golf about once a week, he and I at LA Country Club. And one day he says to me, we're riding along the golf cart, and he says to me, "You must have made a lot of money off me." You know, and I didn't. I says, "No, I didn't. But it says you were one of the best loss leaders in the world." And he just chuckled. Like, yeah, you were right, but how? That was trying. You're riding along with a guy with Alzheimer's in a golf cart, and nothing's said for 3 holes. But you can see him watching you. And I realized this guy's trying to figure out who the hell I am. A guy I knew pretty well.
Well, the ravages of Alzheimer's are far and wide and affect so many, and his letter to the American people certainly was very, very powerful. But I know I'm certainly so grateful on behalf on behalf of the Reagan Foundation, very grateful, Mr. Spencer, for your time and your insights and the long arc of work and experience you had with Ronald Reagan. So thank you again for taking this time with us.
It's my pleasure.